Illustrating the other. Autoethnographic study on racial bias in the design process. How different groups are portrayed has a significant impact on how they are seen, how they see themselves, and what kind of roles they can take in the society. Illustrators have a great responsibility on their shoulders to produce fair representations when portraying outgroups. More information is needed on how racial bias and awareness of one's prejudices affect the design process in practice. The study seeks to deepen understanding on the issue of racial bias in design at a micro level and joins the debate of decolonizing design. Furthermore, the study seeks to explore the effects of consciousness of designers' own biases in the design process and outcome. This study seeks to contribute to the changing of societal norms in regards to racial stereotyping by creating awareness of racial bias in design process, with the hypothesis that this can lead to decrease of the unintended recycling of stereotypical representations of outgroups. Autoethnographic method is used to gain deeper understanding on the role of racial bias in the design process on a micro level. The autoethnographic narrative follows how the project evolves from an attempt to provide variety to illustrations of West African characters in microstock image banks to a personal sense-making quest of a Ghanaian cultural practice which involves children as domestic laborers. The focus of the narrative is on identifying racial stereotypes and personal racial biases behind the stereotypes. The illustration project started as a mission to provide more variety to West African characters in microstock image banks. The overall impression I had was that many of the illustrations in those image banks provided a kind of narrow representation of what it is to be an African. A recurring theme was rural women carrying pots on their heads and depictions of and babies on their backs. The images seemed to lack time and space. They were balanced by a variety of images of modern city life depictions of black characters usually labeled as African American, lacking any references to the continent of Africa or its culture. I wanted to provide illustrations that were characteristically West African, with depth and meaning, and which did not appear stereotypical. As I sketched, I tried to steer away from anything stereotypical and offensive. I felt like my own big brother, watching over every move to reveal the least of mistakes. I had a feeling that whatever I drew was biased somehow. I felt suffocated. Sketching was slow and unfruitful until I decided to analyze my works at a later stage instead of during or immediately after drawing. From the beginning, I struggled with the idea of white person drawing black people. What right do I, as a European designer, define how Africans are seen? I am only able to give an outsider's view on things. Doing so, I continue the colonial setting of the white defining the black, the first world dictating how the third world should be seen. I felt I had to tolerate some level of bias in order to give room to creativity. I became fascinated by the household theme. I reflected it with my own experiences with a young relative who had lived with us for a period of 4 years as a ward, helping in house chores. Her position resembled both that of a family member and that of a househelp. She also represented a larger group known as house girls and their male equivalent houseboys, a part of Ghanaian culture difficult for outsiders like me to fully understand at first sight. The outcome was a vector silhouette collection on the theme of African house girl. It was put on sale on a microstock image bank. I realized in the end that I had used a somewhat paternalistic rhetoric in the outcome. Fiske et al. In their study of stereotype contents suggests that interpersonal and intergroup interactions are the source of stereotypes, two important factors being status and competence, which predict dimensions of stereotypes. When people meet, they want to know each other's intent, that is, their goals toward one group, the degree of warmth, and capability, how effectively they are able to pursue those goals. I use the stereotype content model of Fiske et al. As the basis of my analysis to clarify the motives behind the stereotypes identified during the design process. I noticed that the stereotypes were divided among paternalistic presentations of high degree of warmth and low competence, and envious presentations of low warmth and high competence. Majority of the stereotypes I was able to identify during the design process were paternalistic or envious. The stereotypes I identified during the design process were influenced by Western popular visual culture, which has connections to historical events of transatlantic slavery, abolitionism, colonialism, and post-colonialism. The stereotypes were also influenced by intergroup relationship I was involved with. Awareness of racial bias acted as a filter through which the influencing factors passed. The result was disposal of concepts with racial stereotypes, as well as hindering interference with the creative process. This led to the resolution to postpone critique and to tolerate some racial stereotypes in the design. Subtle racial biases are almost impossible to get rid of, but acknowledging them can help to lessen the use of racial stereotypes when portraying outgroups. However, given too much emphasis, the avoidance of biases can hinder the creative process. This is a problem that is not easy to solve and can create anxiety to the designer. It is nevertheless important that designers are aware of their position as sustainers and creators of social presentations. They should be prepared to defend their decisions publicly and make the viewer aware of subjective nature of the portrayals. Though being aware of one's racial biases during the design process can interfere with the creative process, it is nevertheless helpful in combating the recycling of racial stereotypes when portraying outgroups. Designers should be mindful of their responsibility as facilitators of social representations.